Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
For me, photography is, in some respects, it's a look at the outer and inner person when you take a picture of somebody. And a lot of times you can, from the picture that was taken, you're able to determine the frame of the mood that that particular person is in. And certainly in my particular case, with some of the things that I do with the mentoring and that, is that it allows me to see a different perspective of that person. And in some cases, I'm able to determine just from looking at a picture that that individual is maybe dealing with some things that they may need some help with.
Wow. Thank you, Doug Lawrence. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. It's funny how everybody describes it differently, and nobody's yet used that kind of way of speaking or that approach to describe photography. So it's like already, like, we don't know each other. And thank you. I know it took a long time for us to get to this point.
Yeah, that it did. But here we are.
Okay, well, nice to meet you, man.
It's good to meet you as well.
Okay, so let's just go into the first image and then use that to open the conversation.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So it's a book cover, and the title is "You Are Not Alone: Mental Health Mentors Mental Health Mentors Take the Journey with You." And the image is great because it's one half of it. It's a road that sort of forks, and so it's photoshopped road, I guess. So it's like a bike path or a road. On the left side, it's black and white sepia. The sun is literally right at the point where it says health and journey. It's right behind health and journey. And the sky is kind of, say, some clouds. And the right side of the image is color, bright green. So whoever designed the book for you is very talented. It's a very good photo. Oh, and it's great because there's this one figure who's in silhouette looking to the right. So to where there's brightness and color, but behind, like on the ground, are two shadows. And this is a very symbolic image. Why are we starting here?
So the idea behind the cover was to speak to the journey that someone who is dealing with mental health challenges or issues, that this is what this would entail. This is how you could, if you were somebody from the outside looking in, this is how you could view it. And the idea behind it is that the individual is somebody that may or may not be dealing with mental health challenges, and they have some decisions or choices that they can make. And that constitutes the fork in the road that you've described, and one side darker than the other side, lots of light on, certainly on the one side. And that's symbolic of being able to work through those mental health challenges with that individual. And what's also interesting is that there, with you on your journey, there are always others who are accompanying you. And that's the sort of the shadow type, the two shadowy type images that are there. Those are people that are with you on that journey as well. And they are helping you, they're guiding you, but also helping you in deciding, okay, so which path should I take? Should I reach out for help? Mm-hmm. And so these are all decisions that, which the fork in the road demonstrate, is that I have all these decisions, ultimately one of which may not be one with a tragic outcome. So I need to be very mindful of the choices that I make. And as I put it, I need to, if I'm at a point where I need help, I need to step out of my closet, so to speak, and extend my hand and say, I need help.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hmm. So one thing, okay, so we've never met. You don't know. I worked about 20 years ago. I worked at the Human Rights Commission in Toronto, and people who know me know that I get these phrases or I get these verbal ticks or whatever. And for me, for one phase, and now that I look at your cover, like "you are not alone" was a phrase that I was using rather, kind of playfully. And I remember I just sort of say that to people, like "you're not alone." Okay, so is this your first book?
Second.
Your second book, very good, and it's available on Amazon and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
so why? What got you to the fork in the road that you thought, okay, this book needs to be written?
It was a combination of things. The initial rationale or reason for writing the book was some of my mentors and close colleagues said that, you know, you're working with people who are dealing with mental health issues or challenges. You know, you should be writing a book about this because the work that you do using mentoring as a way to help people begin and continue their healing journey, the things that you're doing need to be shared so that others can do much the same sort of thing. And so
Hmm.
there was that part. The other part was that as I started to do my research based on those comments, I also realized that I too had mental health issues. So I was, as a result of my 25 years in law enforcement, I ended up with post traumatic stress
Oh, wow.
and was having to deal with that and you know the whole aspect of how that impacted my family and my circle of friends and all of those things
Hmm.
all played into that whole story of what it was like to go through that and so I needed to capture that in the book.
Hmm. On the podcast so far, I mean, just because it's a reflection really of my interests, and so mental health is one of the themes that comes up. Previously, I had one author who wrote a book that was, I mean, or she's written various types of books, and we got onto this track of, well, she had a phrase which was "follow your dopamine," which was, design your life in a way that you're essentially choosing ways to place events or rewards where you're getting these dopamine hits. And I thought that was pretty insightful. So the question was like, do you feel that you need to go through this difficult road or this difficult journey? And who doesn't really go through a tough life of, like in your case, law enforcement, post traumatic stress? Could you have written this book without having gone through that turbulence?
I don't think so. In fact, I'm going to go way out on a limb and say no. I don't think that I could have because what you know what it's done right now for me is that writing the book has opened my eyes to all the things that are going on around me, and I'm more in tune with different situations, different things that have happened to me. And, you know, a good example is I lost my wife to cancer in February of 2021,
Oh,
and
wow.
that has caused me to deal with grief. And
Sure.
grief is part of mental health, and it has an impact, a huge impact on your mental health.
Yeah.
And so, if I was not writing a book, and um, I I probably would have I wouldn't have looked at the grief aspect in the manner in which I am looking at it.
Yeah. Well, the thing with writing is that because it's a there's a temporal aspect to it, right? Like you have to start somewhere and you kind of get to another place. For me to kind of think my way through an event, writing it down is a kind of powerful way for me to kind of at least as far as my thinking goes, go, okay, this leads to that. And in a sense, like, for example, one of my near-death experiences was being in the tsunami in 2004, where my wife and I almost drowned. And writing that out gave that structure, or that inclination to say, okay, so here is how I can think about it. Here's I can wrap my mind around something that is just so big and hard to comprehend. So how do you feel writing has influenced your mentoring advice?
Well, one of the first things is that I've found that the writing is extremely therapeutic. So as I'm writing, I'm sharing what's happened, how I feel, and all of that, and then putting the twist on it, or the spin on it, from a mentoring perspective. So what are some of the things that I need to be aware of if I'm going into a mentoring relationship? What it's done for me is that I am my intuition has kicked to a higher level than it's ever been before, because now I'm finding that when I'm talking to people, that we can very quickly get to a place in the conversation where we both share that we're both struggling with mental health challenges. And I was never able to, I could certainly do it with myself, but I could never get to that place with the person that I'm mentoring or talking to. We just didn't get there. But there's something there, and I don't exactly know what it is, that people are comfortable once they start to have that conversation with you, that they'll
Mm-hmm.
say, oh yes, I've been diagnosed with this or that, and all this stuff. And I never asked the question, to say, gee, I think that, you're struggling with mental health. Do you want to tell me more?
Mm.
I don't have to even go there, because they are now openly volunteering and sharing their experiences as well. And then together we can, obviously work together on a healing journey that both of us can benefit from.
So what's the difference between mentoring and coaching?
I got asked that yesterday, so that's a kind of an interesting, and the easiest way for me to describe that is that and this is a very topical issue. What's the difference between coaching and mentoring? But for me, mentoring is a lot longer term relationship. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I have people that I'm working with that we probably have been 6 or 7 years in a mentoring relationship.
Mm.
And some of those are, I do leadership mentoring. And so I'm working with leaders, and I'm plugging into them on an ongoing basis for 6 to 7 years.
Wow.
Coaching is more, from my perspective, coaching is more structured, more the time frame of the relationship is more defined.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, we're going to do this for this period of time, and then we're done, so to speak.
Mm.
It's typically, I see a lot of coaching is used for performance issues.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll bring in a coach to deal with somebody who is struggling performance wise and deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
I've also seen where coaching hasn't worked, and I've come in afterwards as the mentor, and I've been able to help that employee basically go through a behavioral change and get them back to being that productive employee that the organization can count on. And we've simply just done that using some basic mentoring concepts to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, okay. So you are not alone. Mental health mentors and the journey with you. Okay. Doug Lawrence. You want to move on to the next photo, or is this
Sure. Yeah.
awesome? It's a very sweet portrait. A woman wearing a nice white blouse, short cut hair, looking right at the camera. What's nice is that I don't know if the camera is a flash or if it's just a reflection of the light in the room, but there's a perfect highlight right in the middle of her iris. She has I wouldn't call it an authentic smile. I think it's a posed smile. It's not like smiling because of happiness. It's smiling because, oh, here's an image. I'm smiling for the camera or for the viewer. Her hair looks great. She's inside a room. Could be there's wood background. I dare say, I don't know. Is that a bathroom selfie? I don't know. I can't tell. So what's this image?
If it's the one that I'm thinking you're describing, it's a picture of my wife, I
Okay.
believe.
Yeah. Okay, so the title says My Wife Who I Lost to Cancer in February 2021. Well,
Okay,
dude,
so
my sincere condolences. I know it must be
yes,
so tough. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. So it actually it was a selfie that she took. We actually, excuse me, we actually exchanged selfies.
Okay.
I happened to be doing some work, and I was in Dubai at the
Ah.
time, and so in order for us, because we'd been apart for probably about a week at that stage, and
Mm-hmm.
so for us to kind of
Aw.
deal with the separation part, we said, well, let's do a selfie at that particular time point and send it to each other. And so
Sweet.
that that particular picture is one that she took as she was either coming home from or getting ready to go to work.
Wow.
And then I sent one where I think I was sitting at a table in my hotel room, and we did it that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and it's ironic that that picture is the one that we used for her celebration. We did a celebration of life, and
Mm-hmm.
that was the picture that we used for that event as well. It became sort of the one of the most popular pictures out of all the ones that we had of Deborah that
Mm-hmm.
everybody could they sort of gravitated towards it because it
Mm-hmm.
was a picture that just kind of drew you in.
Right. Interesting what happens in my thinking as well. When, you're right. It's a very sweet photo. And also within the frame of this conversation, it's a very heavy, it's a bittersweet photo. And then as you're describing, then when you say Deborah, it's like, oh, wait a second. Then it becomes so much more personal, right? And so why the choice of the photo of celebrating Deborah within this podcast, within your sharing with the world?
Because she's part of my story.
Mm-hmm.
She went through she had to go through some very tough times when I was not the greatest person to be living with because of me dealing with post traumatic stress and not having a mechanism to be able to release all that negative energy and stuff like that. My answer was to turn to a bottle of Scotch whiskey. That
Mm-hmm.
was going to solve all the problems.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as a result of that, there was physical or not physical, sorry, mental abuse, verbal
Mm-hmm.
abuse that she ended up having to listen to and be involved in.
Mm.
So that there were all of those things, and we were together for almost 44 years,
Wow.
and I everything that I did I shared with her,
Mm-hmm.
and so the which is why the picture has a significant meaning to me, and I only hope that through us having this conversation that your listeners are able to they can sort of get that sense and they get to know Deborah as I know her.
So I've had a few people talk about grief, post-traumatic stress, mental health, and the reflex to go to alcohol isn't so strange, because if you think, like, when you go to see a doctor, sometimes their reflex is, okay, they'll prescribe Xanax. And what Xanax is? A
Mhm.
depressant. And alcohol does that same thing. At the end of the day, you just want something to lower, cut, decrease the noise, right? So talk about what does post-traumatic stress manifest like for you? Because everybody, it's like you could put two people will be in the same event, right? And it would seem that it's like, you see the same accident, you're participating in the same traumatic crisis moment, but two people will interpret it very differently and it'll manifest very differently. So in terms of your own PTSD, I don't even know where you work. I don't like what city you're working in, what kind of job you were doing. Why don't you make that real for a listener?
So when the work that I was doing, which precipitated the post traumatic stress, was I was a uniformed police officer and I was working in a lot of very small communities where, in some cases, I was either the only police officer or I was one of two police officers in that community. And so every any call for a police officer,
Mm,
it was me.
yeah.
And so I would end up having to go. And, as a result of that, I got to deal with some situations that hopefully most people would never have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
One of the examples was a young lad that had made the adult men's hockey team in the community, and we were going to head down the highway and play the other community a game of hockey in the middle of winter. And he was happy. He was 16 years of age, and he made the male adult men's team, and he was so proud of himself, as we were of him as well. Only for him to go home and find his parents had been drinking for far too long.
Mm,
And of course, they were not in a position for him to be able to share his good news and great fortune, with them. And as a result of that, he went into a room in the trailer they lived in and hauled out a rifle and took his own life.
oh
And
man.
I ended up being the one police officer that had to go and
Oh
investigate that. And I ended up also having to transport him to the closest place where there was a morgue, which
yeah.
was 8 hours
Holy
away
shit.
by vehicle in the middle of winter.
Wow.
And so I still have certain things trigger me, and I still go back to, number one, having to go and
Yeah.
investigate, and then number two, having to transport him uh, to a place where there was a morgue.
Um. So I had mentioned that I had worked at the Human Rights Commission, and then after that, I moved over to this other organization called the Human Rights Foundation. And the foundation would have every year they'd have a conference where they'd bring in human rights officers and people from around the world to Montreal to participate in this shared learning whatever event. And one of the consistent things that people, for example, people coming from these very difficult, like Bangladeshi or from Egypt or from very difficult countries where you think, oh, human rights abuses were really huge. They come into Canada and they'd see this like idyllic landscape in the summer, not in the winter. But they're like, how can there be human rights issues
Mm.
in Canada? Canada's amazing. So on the one hand, what they had to realize, or they came to realize, was to a certain extent it's relative. It's like there's the perception of what you see, but there's always stuff in the background that civil society hides or doesn't hide, but deals with well enough, right? Like most people, for example, most people who eat meat don't really pay attention to the fact that the cow or the pig, that sentient animal, was killed, right? It's ultimately it is taking a life, and so most people are kind of hidden by that. And in the same way, that you live your life, and for in your case, your job as the one lone police officer, you get the call, you go, and then suddenly, like you're just a person like everybody else, but the social role is that no, you have to go in there, and you have to kind of clean it up for people and make make sense for people, and sort of reset the sort of civil society. So how do you process that road that you've taken at each step, think, okay, well, this is what I want to do. I want to be a police officer. That ends up leading you to these moments that really shake you.
How I process it, it's a matter of looking at it from the aspect of how can I take this and have it be a part of my healing that I'm going through in order to be able to get to a better place overall mental health wise, to be able to do that. The second part for me, and it sort of triggered me to think of something when you were describing how the best way for me to, I guess the best way for me to describe it is when it comes to mental health and mental well-being and anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress and all of those things, a lot of those are not things that we talk about very readily. In fact, when you think about it, mental health and a lot of the offshoots of that are causes for a great deal of concern. In fact, what I describe it as is how mental health is viewed and looked at today is a silent pandemic.
Mm.
Is we don't really spend enough time talking about it, or if we talk about it, we don't really end up with a conclusion as to how we're going to deal with it. And so suicide rates are continuing to increase. The number of people that are struggling with anxiety, depression, and all of those things are continuing to grow, and we're not really doing as much as we could in order to be able to deal with those. And so what it's, we talk about COVID being a pandemic. Well, mental health, mental well-being, post-traumatic stress, all of those things, they're part of what I call a silent pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't deal with those and have a proper support structure in place, we're just heading down a path where we're going to continue to have issues. We're going to continue to have a rising death toll that we're not doing much to combat.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a very heavy conversation for a Saturday morning. um, yeah, like, and by the way, so we're talking about this. In the meantime, on the screen is this photo of Deborah with this very bright, open expression, and then, like, as you're speaking, I kind of realized, like, to be a mentor really is like, mentoring really takes a lot of time, and it really does involve a lot of, you're basically creating a one-to-one personal relationship. Like, my main client in Hong Kong, we worked together for 15 years, and whether he liked it or not, I sort of think of him as a mentor. So yeah, so while you were speaking, I was thinking to myself that here's a person who's really dedicated so much of his time. Like, you've dedicated so much of your time in service, like giving to other people. And unfortunately, the cost to you has been wounds, I guess, in your own mental health. So, but yet you can't turn off that switch. Like, you're still giving back in a way. Like, you're still very much in service.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think I could turn that switch off.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is because I see there's still a need.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main thing. And it's, in some respects, it's a calling that I've been given that I need to continue to go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also it's what Deborah would want me to do. She wouldn't want me to walk away from all these people
Sure.
and not try, because that was her nature as well. So, so there's that part about it as well.
Wow. Okay, well, let's move on to the next image. Unless you want to keep talking about this one. You want to move on to the next photo?
Sure, we can move on. Yeah.
Sure. This time I'll give the title of the photo first. So, a family
Okay.
photo from when my son got married. Aww. So, it's a photo made outside. What part of Canada is this? I can't tell from your accent, and I can't tell from the photo, but it's like it's late summer maybe, or early spring. I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
know.
trying to remember. Yeah.
Um, Maybe September, late August. The main couple getting married. I guess that's your son, and then there's also another group of younger folk. One woman is holding up a baby, very sweet, and then there is you, and I guess that's Deborah standing next to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a photo made from, I don't know, a good like 20 meters away of somebody, so you can see the full body from feet to head, and behind you is this nice wooden, like old wooden exposed fencing or a barn or something, and you're all standing on wood chip style ground, like hard packed. It's not grass, but it's all sort of like, yeah. So what's the significance of your family photo?
As you mentioned, it definitely it was the when my son got married. So it would be 6, 7 years ago now that took place. The picture was taken at what we called the marina. So I'm located in Regina, Saskatchewan, and so
Oh,
the photograph was taken when we sort of they timed their wedding so that it would be conducive to decent weather
right,
patterns, and we
right.
were we weren't dealing with anything on the crazy side.
Yeah.
So, and the infant that's in the picture is my granddaughter, and
Okay.
I've what she would have been probably.
She looks about one and a half.
Yeah, I was going to say 1 to maybe 2 years at best, and she actually played a part in the wedding ceremony, and it was
Sweet.
she's kind of yeah, it was definitely very sweet and stuff, and so they got married. They were the person that presided over the ceremony was a judge who happened to be very close friends with Deborah,
Mm-hmm.
and she knew him through where she worked, and she basically called him up and said that I need you to be facilitate the uniting of my son and my soon to be daughter-in-law
Mm-hmm.
in marriage in matrimony, and I need you to do that for me because we don't want anyone else. And so
Nice.
he went and did all the stuff he had to do in order to become to be able to carry out that.
Okay, okay, okay.
So,
Oh,
yeah, there
nice.
was yeah. So that's the picture, and we don't have. When I look around the house, and that we don't have, I think we only have one other family type picture because
Mm.
in that picture you'd have my son and now daughter-in-law, and you would have my son-in-law and my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd have Olivia, who would be my granddaughter, and then Deborah and I.
Mm-hmm. I think for a listener, it's like, okay, so it's a photo of a family. It's a nice portrait during a wedding. It's just a snapshot from life, really, that
Yeah,
everybody kind of goes through. So to a certain extent, it's almost I don't want to say pedestrian, but it's almost, it's really not flashy, but it's just a
no.
really, it's like just a sweet, beautiful image of people together. Now, how do we tie that back to the benefits of mentoring specifically?
So number one is that family is very important to me. So having those family photographs like that
Mm-hmm.
have definitely some personal attachment to.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing to think about from a mentoring perspective is that mentoring can and does play a part in families. So as we as parents pass on our lived experience to,
For sure.
that's how the mentoring connects to that particular aspect of it. It's a matter of being able to not so much tell your children what they should be doing, but it's about being able to use mentoring processes to ask questions to help them think their way through different situations. Like I take a look at my daughter and how she speaks to her two children and how she gets them involved in solving their own crisis, their own problems, and getting them to understand that for every decision, there is an outcome, but there's also a consequence. And I stand back and I look and I'm exceptionally proud of how she parents
Hmm.
and the tools that she's been given and how she uses those.
From my professional side, in terms of the service network leadership, and what we say is a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of business owners are like, okay, how can I make my company more efficient, more productive? And that's why we would get hired. And then what we would say is, well, at the very foundation, we're all born into a service network. In a service network, if you model it like in a sort of top-down command and control style of decision making, that's one way of thinking about it. But what we would say is that no, it's more participatory. It's service leadership is about everybody within the network, shares within the network health, or the decision making, or however people live and experience life. So in a family, I'm looking at this photo of you guys. It's 7 people together in a very intimate service network, and like a baby fills a baby's service, right? And a baby's
Mhm.
service is meant to be a particular way. And so when you're saying about being able to observe in your daughter how she mentors or uses mentoring tools to kind of get her children to shift their behavior or learn and grow and become more developed, to me that makes really great sense. So within your networking practice, when you're hired as a mentor, how do you articulate, how do you connect that so that the person really connects with this idea of, well, I need to shift my thinking in how I connect within my family or within my company or whatever to get growth or gains or benefits. So yeah, how do you explain mentorship or mentoring to others?
I look at it from a couple aspects. The one is the definition that I use, which is a two-way trusted relationship where both the mentor and the mentee are going to learn and develop on a personal and professional basis. So there's the personal growth that takes place first before we start to look at the career development piece. What I've found is when I go into an organization to, say, help them deal with some employees that maybe they're thinking of terminating or that they would hope to get more from, I go about building a trusting relationship with that individual. And part of that is also talking about their upbringing
Mm-hmm.
and understanding what were some of the challenges that you faced as you grew up in your particular family. And
Mm.
here are some of the things that I grew up with. Alcohol was a huge thing in my family growing up because my father, God bless him, was an alcoholic. And
Mm-hmm.
there were lots of things I got to witness that have have shaped how I deal with things today.
Mm-hmm.
And so, getting people to understand that number one, I'm opening up and sharing. So, I'm hoping that you'll feel comfortable as I'm working with you. I'm hoping you'll feel comfortable to say, well, yeah, that kind of happened to me, or that, I don't know why we're talking about that because that's not even relevant in
Mm-hmm.
my case. And then being able to explore and dig a little bit deeper to sort of find out what were some of the things that caused you to behave the way you do today, and probably in a large majority of those I can link it back to your upbringing.
Mm. Okay, for somebody listening who's thinking, okay, so what is this job anyway? So how many clients do you have at any one time?
I'm probably,
That face you just gave.
yeah,
Yeah, I know that face. Yeah, yeah. It's a hustle, man. It's a hustle. I know.
yeah. So I'm probably working with 10 to 15 people
Wow, nice,
right
nice,
now.
nice.
Some are volunteer work. So I do for I think three different organizations. I do volunteer work, volunteer mentoring with,
Hmm.
and then some are paid.
Right. Do you have do you have a website? Do you have something I can promote? I mean, I'll put it in the description, of course.
Yeah,
What's the website?
yeah. The website is
Hmm.
www.talentc. So the word talent with the letter C on the end. .ca.
Okay. Okay. So is it that you were a police officer and then you hit this crisis moment? You personally, all of a sudden, realized, okay, whoa, this is bigger than me. And then you took leave and but through retirement. Like, how did you step away from being an active on duty police officer to being, okay, you know what? I am going to take this whole world of service, of helping others, and I'm going to shift how I bring that into the community.
So how it all started was while I was still working in the RCMP, I I came to realize that I was actually because I was managing, a 140 to 160 employees. I was responsible for them and their personal and professional development. And I didn't know what I was actually doing, like what kind of the moniker that you wanted to
Mm,
put around it. But I eventually, because I would have staff coming into my office and I would ask them questions to help them think their way through stuff, and they'd leave and they'd go, "It's magic." You go in there into his office and you sit down and he asks you a few questions, and all of a sudden, poof,
mm-hmm.
the answer to those questions is there. So, but what really drove the journey that I'm still on is that I was job coaching university students or college students, helping them, resume and cover letter and interview prep and all that sort of stuff. And they would get hired, and then 3 4 months down the road, they'd encounter a situation that they didn't know how to deal. So they, Doug, we need to talk to you. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do the same thing. I just ask questions to get them to think their way through and be able to figure it out on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And they eventually they got to a point where I was getting referral after referral after referral, and they said, you need to do this for a living.
Mm-hmm.
We can't afford to pay you, but I'm sure somebody could. And so I started then to do market research, and I found that there was a niche, that there was a need that was there that I could fill.
Mm-hmm.
And it involved mentor certification, but it also involved mentoring and helping other people become the best that they can be on a personal and professional basis.
Well, that's so generous and amazing. Like, I respect. I want to get to the next photo because see, that's what's crazy about these podcasts. Like for me, I meet people like you, and I'm like I want to talk to you for hours, but for the listeners' benefit, I'm going to keep it to an hour. So can we move on to the next photo?
Yes, we can.
Okay, way more dynamic. Okay, so in this photograph, you're standing on a stage. It's a shot from the audience, probably a school amphitheater. Not a huge, not an immense stage or theater. Probably houses about 1 to 200 people. In the audience, you can see the heads of all these heads sort of looking at you. Most of them are female. On the screen, it says "Fearless Mentoring, Developing Tomorrow's Leaders," and so you're addressing the audience. It's called. Oh, look at that. Okay, so the title of the photo is "One Woman Fearless Summit in Victoria, British Columbia." Take it away, Doug.
So it was an opportunity that was given to me to speak to this the One Woman Fearless Summit in Victoria. So I was given the opportunity to speak to this, and this was significant and important to me because I believe, if my memory serves me correct, that I was the only male speaker throughout that whole day.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that my presentation, for me, it was something that I remember because I did it without the use of PowerPoint. So I
Mm-hmm.
spoke for, I think it was 20 minutes with unscripted.
Yeah.
In fact, not totally unscripted, because I remember now on a napkin I had written sort of what the points were, and I put that on the podium,
Mm-hmm.
and then I never went back to the podium
Nice.
after that. So I shared with them some mentoring experiences that I had had with, ironically, because I had done some work with some very gifted women that I had worked with. And so I shared sort of the general concept or the general idea of what it was we were discussing. So, excuse me, as one example was how a young lady got referred to me by another mentor, and how we went through the initial meeting, and me very quickly realizing that here we had somebody who was dealing with self-esteem, self-confidence
Mm.
issues, and I needed to figure out, okay, what's our plan of attack going to be, because we need to get this person back on track. And so it was a matter of, going through their resume, which was a resume that was very negative, and so we had to change that. We had to go through kind of a personal growth makeover where I needed to get them to a place where they believed in themselves just as much as I believed in what they were capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to do that. And even some simple things of taking Post-it notes and sticking them on the bathroom mirror with positive affirmation statements written on them to help get
Mm-hmm.
the person starting their day in the right context. And we did all of that. And once we cleaned up the resume and made it more positive for people, for hiring managers to pick it up and read it, she got, I think, 3 or 4 interview opportunities within a couple-week time frame. And then one turned into an offer. And then the offer from there turned into an opportunity at head office in Ontario. And then she's had a couple other opportunities since then, because we still stay in touch, and periodically we'll set up a virtual chat. But so it was stories like that that I shared with those that were in attendance. There was about 125 women that were in the session,
Mm-hmm.
so which was good. And I had my first book that I had written, The Gift of Mentoring. I had, I think, a dozen or so of them, and I gave those away at the seminar. And I found it very interesting. Was I said I only brought 12. So I'm going to, when I'm done speaking, I'll be up in the lobby, and it's kind of first come, first serve. And there was there was actually it was a little bit of pushing and shoving going on to get to the front of the line.
Nice, nice. Wow. Okay, so the point of my podcast is to inspire others. If life really is a gift, how do we make every second count? I assume that in that speaking engagement, you're essentially giving them tools and ideas and just sharing, because it's very strange when I look at the image, okay, in terms of what's actually happening. A whole bunch of these human beings are seated and they're all being quiet, and they're all like staring, looking forward at you. And then there's this guy on the stage talking and just sharing ideas. And somehow, like you're communicating concepts that are in your head that they're listening to. They enter the room, and then each individual person connects or disconnects with what you're saying. It's a strange sort of feature of how brains work, that essentially the work you do to survive and to earn a living is to sit with people and just talk. And the conversation at the beginning of the session is, or like your mindset at the beginning of the conversation is one way, and then half an hour later, just by the exchange of words, all of a sudden you've sparked something in that other brain to potentially change their whole life, right? So how about you talk about what the potential is, like about that moment, like why the magic of a conversation?
Well, what's really, and I'm glad you brought that up because the I had a couple at that session in Victoria. I actually had a couple wonderful people come up to me afterwards and say, "Thank you so much for what you shared. I saw myself in that story that you shared."
Mm-hmm.
And it's given me a different perspective on how I want to deal with similar situations going forward. It's also given me, a different perspective on situations that I'm dealing with right at this very moment, and different approaches that I can take. And oh, by the way, can I get a copy of your book, so to speak?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea behind why I feel that I have success is I have obviously a significant amount of lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
And my objective is to be able to take those lived experiences and kind of shape and model them into a story,
Mm.
because we all relate to stories a lot more easily than we do if somebody, has a list of bulleted points and says, okay, if this happens, do this, this, and this. Where if it's me that's doing that, I am talking about actual lived experience that I've gone through and perhaps how it's impacted me as an individual, not
Mm-hmm.
only, today, but tomorrow when I go to deal with something similar, I'm going to quite possibly respond a different way than I would if I had not had that lived experience.
Right. I think it's really interesting in terms of how we came to meet and the sort of the chasing of back and forth and the annoyingness of the time difference, that I'm ready at 3 o'clock and you're ready at 5 o'clock, and it's like, okay. So then you're now a kind of, it's, I know it might feel weird to hear, but now you're a kind of elder who sits with others to mentor them because you have this experience behind you. Now, let's bring you back to that first year on the job as a police officer. So you've gone through training, you're going out as a police officer. How is that brain of yours from back then and that perspective of yours from back then, how is that connected to who you are now in terms of how were you a mentor back then? Because in a sense, it's like you've matured into who you are. So that means that maturity came from some earlier state. So why don't you bring us back to that earlier state to hopefully maybe have somebody who's listening to this will be like, oh, I can recognize myself in that as well.
When I think of my first place that I worked as a police officer, I actually ended up at one time point. So I took my training here, ironically, here in Regina, Saskatchewan, the home of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And my very first posting was to Prince Rupert in northern British Columbia. And it was a large detachment. It was probably 20 plus police officers. And so we had one police officer that was always dedicated to what they called court liaison. So you worked with the prosecutors and you worked with the provincial court judge and that. And I think when I think back now, when you brought that up, I was thinking, okay, so how did my first year shape? And actually, what it did was I had to build a relationship with that judge in order to be able to effectively deal with cases that we were going to be bringing before him in his courtroom. And I needed to be able to learn how to be respectful of somebody in a position like that. I needed to learn how to communicate very effectively with somebody like that. And in some cases where you wanted a certain outcome to take place, I needed to be able to, where the communication kicked in, I needed to be able to do that. That was the start of a couple different opportunities that I had where I was in, in a similar like court liaison position where I was afforded opportunities that a lot of people didn't get.
Mm-hmm.
And a large part of that was because of, number one, my ability to build relationships, and number two, my ability to communicate effectively, which are all qualities of an effective mentor.
Mm-hmm. Doug Lawrence, look, I'm sure we barely scratched the surface of your work and your life. And let me just repeat the title of your book, which is the phrase that I use all the time to my colleagues' chagrin was "You are not alone." Okay, so mental health mentors and the journey with you. Doug Lawrence, thank you so much. It took a while for us to get here, but I really appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for the opportunity. A deep discussion on a Saturday, as you've noted, but well worth it.
Shooting it raw?
Yes.